Hi, Bill Collins here, Apex Truck School in Hudson, Wisconsin. Well, today what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through the pre-trip inspection process for when you take your CDL road test. Now, first off, this is the inspection checklist that you get to use in hand while you do your inspection with the examiner. There's two sides to this paper. One is for straight trucks and one is for tractor trailer Class A rigs. So for those of you using Class A, obviously you use the one with the truck and the trailer, and Class B with just the truck. Now, you cannot have any notes on this. There can't be any sort of hints. It has to come just as it is printed by the state of Wisconsin in their CDL manual. Now, when you go to take your test, this is the examination site here in Hudson, Wisconsin. This is exactly where the truck will be parked when you do your inspection. When you do the inspection, the examiner is going to randomly determine if you're going to do the full inspection bumper to bumper or just a segment of the vehicle. So the options are: option A, inspecting the front of the truck from the windshield to the front bumper. Option B is to inspect from the front bumper to the rear of the truck, the rear of the tractor. Option C is to do the trailer. Option D is the entire rig bumper to bumper. In any one of those four options, you must do your inspection test on the connection components between the truck and trailer, and you must also do the in-cab inspection once you jump in the truck with the examiner. So that's required. So what I'm going to do today is do the complete inspection from bumper to bumper as you're supposed to do it on your test. So the first thing on the checklist here is the front of the vehicle, lights and reflectors. So let's go up in front here and I'll show you what we need to inspect. The first thing I would show the examiner are my lenses for my lights. So I have left and right headlight lenses. They're not cracked, damaged, or missing. The running lights are behind these lenses. The lenses are not cracked, damaged, or missing. On the top of the tractor, I've got reflectors, clearance lights, clearance lights at the top. They are amber in color. The lenses are not cracked, damaged, or missing. Now, in case you're wondering, we're going to check that they work a little bit later. But to start off with, all we do is check that the lights and lenses are not cracked, damaged, or missing, and proper color. On the side of the tractor here, we're required to have a yellow reflector. It's inside that lens. It's not cracked, damaged, or missing. This side indicator and turn signal light is not required by the federal rules, but the lens is not cracked, damaged, or missing. So that would be the first thing you do, is point out the lights and reflectors on the front of the checklist. The next thing on the checklist is the engine compartment. So I'm going to open the hood and go through those components. All right, so what I'm going to do now is cover the engine compartment components prescribed by the list here. So first thing I should probably check is my oil level. That is the dipstick for the checking the oil level. Now, you don't actually check fluids during your test. Simply explain to the examiner that the oil is checked with the motor off, pulling this stick out, wiping it clean, reinserting it, pulling it back out a second time, and looking at the level on the stick. There's going to be a high and low mark. The level must be above the refill mark. Continuing with my fluids check, this is the power steering reservoir here on this truck. It is plastic. There is a high and low mark, so you can see the fluid level within the plastic and determine if it is at the proper level. Make sure it's not leaking. The cap is on tight. The next fluid I'm going to check would be my coolant level. This is a plastic expansion chamber. You can see it has a maximum and an add level, and it's within that level. It's quite high, actually. It's up about the max level there. It's securely attached, it's not leaking, and the cap is on tight. The next thing I'd like to show you is the air compressor on this truck. The air compressor on this truck is right towards the front of the motor. The air compressor is not belt driven on this truck. So you need to explain that to the examiner, that a component like this, if it were belt driven, the belt would have to be checked, but this does not have a belt driven compressor. Sure that it's securely attached, is not leaking. The power steering pump, in order to find the power steering pump, it's real simple. Take your power steering reservoir, follow the power steering hose back to where the pump is located, and that's the power steering pump. And you'll also notice that the power steering pump is also not belt driven. And again, that needs to be explained to the examiner. Then I should check my water pump. My water pump is always at the front of the motor, directly behind the fan. You are to tell the examiner that the water pump is securely attached and not leaking. Next, I want to cover the alternator. The alternator is frequently on the other side of the truck, so we need to walk over there to show the examiner the alternator. Anything that's not on that side of the truck, you would need to walk over here to show the examiner. So here's our alternator. Make sure that it's securely attached. It is belt driven, as is the water pump. Again, here's the water pump. That's a clearer view of the water pump there. So the alternator and the water pump are belt driven. You need to explain that to the examiner. Tell him that the belt cannot be damaged, cracked, frayed, missing, cannot be missing, and properly tensioned. That means when you push on the longest part of the belt, it should not deflect more than 3/4 of an inch, and the wires are securely attached. Now, one more thing that we need to cover with the engine compartment are leaks and hoses. Now, you've got several hoses all over the place on these vehicles. You do not need to identify which hose is which, but you do need to point out hoses and say that hoses are securely attached, clamps are not missing or loose, the hoses themselves are not damaged, frayed, and above all, not leaking air and not leaking any fluids. So check all of your hoses. So that completes our engine compartment components. Now we're going to go to the steering components. And first and foremost would be your steering box. Very easily located right here on the side of the frame. It is securely attached with these bolts. It's important to make sure that it's securely attached and not leaking. Then your steering linkage. Now you don't really need to identify these by name, but this is the pitman arm right here. Then we have the drag link going back to the left front tire, and then the tie rod going across from one side to the other. What you're checking is to make sure that all of these suspension components are securely attached. You can see here we have a cotter key holding in the bolt and nut on this ball joint, and then up here where the pitman arm and drag link meet, there's another cotter key there securing that device. So it's real important that you are checking to make sure that all of these steering components are securely attached, no missing nuts, bolts, cotter keys, and nothing's loose or damaged. So that completes our steering system, pretty simple. Now we need to go into our suspension components. So let's talk first about the shock absorber right here. It's real visible. The shock absorber, make sure that it's securely attached on the top and the bottom, and it shouldn't be leaking here at the center of the shock. That's important. Then we have the spring. This big leaf spring here on every one of our trucks is going to have a leaf spring on the front. Check these leaves, make sure they're not cracked, broken, damaged, or missing. The spring is going to attach on the front and the rear. They are called spring hangers or spring mounts. Make sure those mounts are securely attached. None of the bolts are loose or missing. There's a bushing where the spring attaches to the bracket. Make sure the bushing is not damaged and leaking any grease. The spring attaches to the axle in the center here with U-bolts. You're checking your U-bolts. Make sure the U-bolts are securely attached. Nothing's loose or missing. So that's your front suspension on the front of the truck. Now I'm going to go into the next item here on brakes. First off, with the brakes, we have our air hose here. The air hose has to be securely attached, cannot be leaking, cannot be damaged with cracks or frays. This is the air brake chamber. The air brake chamber cannot be damaged with dents or cracks or rust. The air brake chamber needs to be securely attached with these nuts and bolts. This clamp holding the chamber together must be securely attached and not loose, and not leaking any air. Next, we have our slack adjuster and push rod. This is the push rod right here. and this is the slack adjuster here. Look for loose or missing parts. That would be these pins could conceivably be missing. Make sure they're not missing or loose. And then when pulled by hand, this push rod should not pull out from the chamber more than 1 inch. That's how you determine proper brake adjustment. Then we should check the brake drum and brake lining. The brake lining has to be at least 1/4 of an inch thick. The brake drum and lining cannot be cracked, and no grease or oil or foreign debris on the drum or lining. So that completes our suspension components. Next, let's talk about our tires. The front tire on a truck must have at least 4/32 of tread depth measured on the major tread grooves. You'd also want to tell the examiner that you should check the tread to make sure it's not worn unevenly. I would prefer you don't scrape your hand over, but at least make this motion to explain how the tread is checked to make sure it's not worn unevenly. Check the tread and the sidewall to make sure there's no separation here. Check the sidewall to make sure there's no damage, cuts, bulges. Check for proper inflation pressure. Now you're not going to check the pressure, but you tell the examiner you do check that with a tire gauge. And then also check the valve stem here. Make sure the valve stem is not leaking and the cap is in place. Then let's talk about our wheels. Our wheels cannot be dent or cracked. Look for any welding repairs. Conceivably, the wheel could have cracked and someone might have come along and welded it up to repair it, and that's not allowed. So check to make sure they're not dent, cracked, damaged. Next, we're going to check our lug nuts. So we have 10 lug nuts here. They all have to be securely attached. None of these lug nuts can be loose. To check for looseness, you look to see if there's any shiny threads. You can see that each one of these lug nuts has the exact same physical appearance, which indicates to me that none of them are loose. You can't really check this by hand. The only way to typically, or completely check it, I should say, would be to use a big wrench. And drivers don't carry big wrenches to check the lug nuts. So this is a visual to make sure that those all appear to be securely attached. If you have any questions about that, then of course have a mechanic get out a wrench and secure them. Then we should check the hub, make sure that we're not losing any grease. There's a seal right here that's holding in the grease inside that front hub and spindle and bearing, and we want to make sure there's no grease leaking there, and check that the oil level is adequate. We've already mentioned that we're going to check for grease potentially leaking out of the inside of the wheel on the front brakes, and that's not allowed either. All right, that completes checking the front of the truck. Now I'm going to check what they refer to as the driver fuel area, which is from the windshield back. So first, let's talk about the windshield itself. The windshield cannot be cracked or damaged. There should be no illegal stickers on it. Then let's talk about our mirrors. We want to check our mirrors, make sure the brackets are securely attached. Nothing's loose or missing in terms of the securement of the mirror. And then you would check your mirror glass to make sure it's not cracked, damaged, or missing. Next, we should check the driver's door. We want to make sure that the driver's door opens and closes properly, that it's hinged properly, that it secures properly. Now, one of the things that the CDL manual wants you to check is to make sure that this rubber seal is intact to prevent any hot or cold air from entering the cab under the different weather conditions. So the door is operating properly, secures, and latches properly. Here's the fuel tank on this truck. Now some of the trucks you don't have a fuel tank on the left-hand side, the driver's side here. So it's important that anything that's not on this side of the truck, you would need to walk over and point it out on the other side. But this particular truck, we do have a fuel tank on this side. The fuel tank is securely attached, the cap is tight, and it's not leaking. These steps going in and out of the truck, you are to make sure they're securely attached, there are no foreign debris on them, and they're secure, not loose. None of the nuts and bolts are loose or missing. We also sometimes have what's called a catwalk between the frame rails here on some of these trucks. This truck doesn't have a catwalk because it's so easy to get right in here and do a connection without climbing up on the catwalk. But that's what a catwalk refers to, is an aluminum plate there in the center to allow you to get up and secure the lines. This is the battery box on this truck. Again, this might be on the other side. Some trucks it's tucked under the door. Checking the battery box, make sure that it's securely attached, that the cover is securely latched. You do not need to open the battery box to look at the batteries, but tell the examiner that batteries should be checked to make sure they are securely attached, that the cables are securely attached without any excessive corrosion, and then if it's a battery with caps, that the caps are on tight. Next, let's talk about the frame of the tractor. You want to check the longitudinal members of the frame and the cross members of the frame. Checking to make sure nothing is bent, cracked, and none of these nuts and bolts that attach the one side of the frame to the other are loose or missing. We can see the exhaust here, but tell you what, let's go to the other side and we can see the exhaust a little bit better. So here's the exhaust muffler and tailpipe here on this side of the truck. You're checking to make sure that the exhaust is securely attached. By all means, make sure there's no leaks. Soot coming out of the connections would be an indication of a leak, and it's terribly important that you don't have any exhaust leaks, especially underneath the cab of the truck, emitting exhaust fumes up into the cab, presenting a real safety hazard. So make sure everything's securely attached, no loose or missing nuts or bolts, no holes or cracks in the muffler or the pipe, and no visible signs of any sort of exhaust leaks. Next, I want to point out the drive shaft that runs down the center of the truck, connecting the transmission to the rear end. Check this drive shaft. Make sure it's not bent or cracked. Make sure there are no foreign debris in the U-joints of the drive shaft. One more thing we need to check on the back of the tractor here would be the mud flaps, also referred to as splash guards. Make sure they're securely attached, not damaged. These can crack and break, especially in the wintertime when it gets cold. On the back of the tractor, we are required to have these reflectors here. You can see a white reflector up here in sort of an L shape, an angle, a 90-degree angle. That's required on both sides of the back of the tractor. Those reflectors are in good shape. They are not cracked, damaged, or missing. In the back of the tractor, we do have red lights. You can see that we have our tail lights here. Both sides, that will be our running lights, that will be our four-way flashers, and it'll be our turn signals. The backup lights would be the white lights here. Those lenses are not cracked, damaged, or missing. Then this conspicuousy tape is required on the back of a semi-tractor. That tape is not missing or damaged and clearly visible. Let's talk about your suspension components on the rear of the truck. This is the spring, sometimes also referred to as a torque arm. It depends whether it goes from one bracket to the axle to another bracket, then I'd call it a spring. If it goes from the bracket to the axle and ends there, I'd call it a torque arm. Really doesn't matter what you call it, but this is your suspension spring. We're checking it to make sure it's not cracked, bent, damaged, loose, or missing. We're checking the brackets that attach the spring, make sure these nuts and bolts are securely attached, nothing's loose or missing, and then this would be the bushing here. The bushing cannot be damaged and causing any grease to be leaking out. The axle is going to mount to the spring with U-bolts, just as in the front of the truck. Check these U-bolts, make sure the U-bolts are not damaged, missing, or loose. This truck is also equipped with an airbag. We can see that better from the back here. So here's our airbag. The airbag itself cannot be leaking or damaged, cracks. The airbag is going to have a mount on the top and a mount on the bottom. Make sure that the mount is securely attached. None of the bolts are loose or missing. Let's talk about the rear brakes now. You can see the air brake chamber here, the spring chamber on the back of the truck pretty easily. The chamber needs to be securely attached. It cannot be cracked or damaged. No dents or rust. Cannot be leaking any air. The clamps need to be tight and the brackets securely attaching it. The air hose, a little difficult to see on these rear brakes here. The air hose is going to the air brake chamber, a little difficult to see on the back here, but just as in the front, the air hoses cannot be damaged. They must be securely attached. No cracks or frays, and no leaks. Now, one of the things that we tell you at your classes at school is do not get underneath the truck or trailer during your test. We don't want you to do that because we don't want you to bonk yourself in the head. However, there are some components that cannot be seen unless you literally get down on hands and knees in order to be able to point to the components underneath the truck or trailer. So you need to be willing and ready, prepared to do that, especially with things like slack adjusters and some of the suspension components. Again, don't crawl underneath, but do get down on hands and knees in order to point properly at where these components are. You won't receive credit unless you identify to the examiner where these components are. So here's my slack adjuster on the rear of the truck. I'm checking the slack adjuster to make sure that none of the components are loose or missing. And the best way to check slack adjustment on the rear of the truck is to look at the angle of the push rod and the pivot arm with the brakes applied and make sure that the slack adjuster and push rod are at a 90-degree angle. That tells us the brakes are adjusted properly with the brake applied. Another component that can't be seen unless you get down on hand and knee are the shock absorbers on this truck. So the shock absorbers need to be checked, make sure they're securely attached at top and bottom, and make sure there's no leaks. Here's our U-bolts, pretty clearly visible from underneath the truck, holding the axle and the spring together, cannot be loose or missing. Let's talk about the tires on the rear of the truck. The tread depth has to be a minimum of 2/32 of tread in the major grooves on the rear tires. We still need to check to make sure that the tread is worn evenly. We still need to make sure that there's no tread or sidewall separation. We need to make sure that there's no damage to the sidewall, no cuts or cracks or bulges. Make sure that the tires are properly inflated. Inflation pressure is checked with a tire gauge. And checking the valve stem, make sure the valve stem is not leaking and the cap is in place. Since we're talking about the rear tires, we also need to talk about checking between the two tires, make sure the tires are not touching and there's no foreign debris between these two tires. The rims also need to be checked, just as in the front. No dents, cracks, and no welds. Lug nuts need to also be checked. Make sure they are securely attached. None of the lug nuts are loose or missing. Look for shiny threads or other indications of loose lug nuts. Hub oil seal needs to be checked. Make sure there's no grease leaking out of the seal here onto the outside of the wheel, and the inner seal needs to be checked also. Now, I just remembered something when I was talking about the brakes earlier. I pointed out the air hose, the air brake chamber, the slack adjuster, and the push rod. But you know what? I forgot about the brake drum and brake lining. Now, that's not a problem during your test. If you forget something as you go along and you remember it later, there's no deduction of points to come back and talk about it as long as you remember it yourself and don't have to be clued in by the examiner. So I'm going to tell the examiner that I would check my brake linings. They're inside the wheel here. Check to make sure that the brake lining is not less than 1/4 inch thick. There's no cracks in the drummer lining and no foreign debris or grease or oil on the brake drummer lining. This wheel seal reminded me of that. So again, if you remember something that you've skipped or missed, fine, just go back to it. It's not a problem. Now, these are Budd wheels on the back of this truck. Budd wheels create the separation between the two. There's an offset to them. The wheels are flipped so that the inner and the outer offsets are together, and that's what creates our separation here. There are no spacers between these wheels since these are Budd type wheels. Now let's talk about the trailer itself. Check the front of the trailer to make sure there's no structural damage, there's no dents or bulges, none of the rivets or bolts that are holding it together are popping out or loose. So you want to check the structural integrity of the front of the trailer. The lights on the trailer, we have clearance lights way up on top. They are amber in color. The lenses cannot be cracked, damaged, or missing. Up at the top also we have our reflector on this trailer. There needs to be a yellow reflector on the front of the trailer. Again, lens is not cracked, damaged, or missing. And speaking of reflectors, this reflective tape alongside the side of the trailer is required. They refer to it as conspicuousy tape. That's required to be 50% of the trailer must be equipped with that reflective tape. This truck also has a side marker and signal light. It's not required by rule, but the lens is not cracked, damaged, or missing, and it's amber in color. Checking the landing gear, these support systems have to be secure. None of these bolts are allowed to be loose or missing, not bent or cracked. The handle for the landing gear is up in the secured position. The landing gear is all the way up. That's important. The pads for the landing gear are in place. The frame of the trailer should be checked to make sure that the frame is secure. So all of these cross members, checking to make sure there's nothing loose or missing, no big rust holes, nothing structurally problematic on the frame of the trailer. Let's talk about the brakes on the rear of the truck here. Here are our air brake chambers. The chamber needs to be securely attached. It cannot be cracked or damaged. No dents or rust. Cannot be leaking any air. The clamps need to be tight and the brackets securely attaching it. The hoses to the air brake chambers are securely attached. None of the lines are loose or missing. The lines are not damaged with cracks or frays. The lines are not leaking any air. Here's our air brake slack adjuster and push rod. That's the push rod there. Pivot arm of the slack adjuster there. No loose or missing parts. The angle of the push rod and the pivot arm is at 90 degrees with the brakes applied. Brake drum and brake lining we can see on the other side over here. Brake lining at least 1/4 inch thick. No grease or oil on the drummer lining. No cracks in the drummer lining. Let's talk about our rear tires. Our rear tires are tread depth on the trailer here, not less than 2/32 inch of tread depth. The tread not worn unevenly or damaged. The sidewall not separated with the tread or sidewall. Sidewall not damaged with cuts, cracks, or bulges. Proper inflation pressure checked with a tire gauge. A valve stem cap intact and not leaking. Checking between the tires, no foreign objects, and the two tires are not touching each other. The wheels, again, not cracked, bent, or damaged, no welding repairs. Lug nuts, all the lug nuts are securely attached. No rust trails or shiny threads indicating that the lug nuts might be loose. Checking the hub for a leaking of grease. You can see a little bit of moisture here, but really not problematic. But making sure that there's no grease leaking out of the hub inside or outside. Continuing with lights, this is a red reflector on the back of the trailer. That's required, not cracked, damaged, or missing. A yellow light on the back of the trailer on the driver's side would indicate an ABS light. It is amber in color. If it's on, there's a problem with the ABS. If it's off, the ABS is working properly. Mud flaps required back here, also called splash guards, securely attached, not cracked or damaged. Here's our lights on the rear of the trailer. Lenses, not damaged, cracked, or missing. Reflector, not cracked, damaged, or missing. This would be the license plate light. This conspicuousy tape is required down here at the bottom of the trailer, all the way across. At the top of the trailer, we're required to have the white reflective up at the angle, the 90-degree angle up at top on both sides. Clearance lights way up on top up there, red in color, not cracked, damaged, or missing. Anything on the rear of the trailer or truck has to be red. Back here we can take a look at our suspension components. This trailer has air ride suspension, so there's your airbags. The airbags are not cracked or damaged or leaking any air. Here's the bottom mount and the top mount for the airbags securely attached. Here would be our shock absorber on the rear here, securely attached on the top and the bottom, not leaking. Here are our U-bolts that attach the torque arm, and this is definitely a torque arm on this trailer, but here are the U-bolts that attach the torque arm to the axle, and then the torque arm is attached to the frame up here. Make sure all of those attachment points are securely attached, nothing's loose or missing. Again, here's your slack adjusters, very easily visible in the back here. No loose or missing parts, 90 degrees with the brake applied. Here again is your brake lining and brake drum. Lining at least 1/4 inch thick. No cracks in the drummer lining, no grease or oil in the drummer lining. We should check the doors on the back of the trailer. The door is securely attached. Here's the latching device. The cables that support the door are not broken or cracked, damaged. All of the hinges up here, these are all hinges here, all these bolts on the outside. None of those are loose or missing. We generally seal these trailers so you don't have to open them during the test. Now you do have to go over to the other side of the truck and trailer to look for any components that aren't on the driver's side. In this case, there's nothing here, but some of our trailers, there will be a door over here on this side. If that's the case, do go over and point out the door on the passenger side. So now we've completed the 3 sections of the combination vehicle. The front engine compartment area, the driver fuel area, and the trailer. Again, you might do one of those 3 or all 3 of them. Now, regardless of whether you do all 3 or one of them, you always must check your trailer connection components. So let's go over them. First of all, the air lines coming out of the back of the tractor. These are securely attached. These are put on by a mechanic. These aren't removable by the driver, but make sure they're securely attached and there's no leaks. This is where the electrical cord attaches on the back of this tractor. Sometimes these electrical cords are hardwired. This time it's put in with a plug and a tongue and groove. It's securely attached. Now you want to check these air lines and the electrical line. Make sure there's no cuts or cracks or splices to them, no frays. Make sure they're not damaged, and of course no air leaks. Then the connection components for the fifth wheel, first of all, we should check these mounting bolts. So these bolts right here are mounting the fifth wheel assembly to the frame of the tractor. So those mounting bolts cannot be loose or missing, securely attaching everything. Then they want you to point out the platform. This is the platform right here. It's the elevated area of the fifth wheel that supports this pin that secures the fifth wheel. So this platform, makes sure that it's not damaged, cut, cracked, bent, rusted, and there's no structural problems with the platform here. Then they want you to talk about the locking jaws. Now, the proper way to check the locking jaws would be to literally crawl underneath the truck and trailer, turn and look straight up the throat of the fifth wheel, and you're looking to make sure the locking jaws are securely attached around the kingpin. Now, I'll show you that on videotape, but when you take your test, please do not crawl underneath here. What I want you to do is I want you to take your pointer stick and tell the examiner that to check the locking jaws, I would crawl in, halfway in there, turn and look up the throat of the fifth wheel at those locking jaws to make sure they are locked and clasped around the kingpin. Even in the daytime, I'd use a flashlight to do that. But don't do that during your test, just explain that's how it's done. The release lever needs to be pointed out. This is the release lever on this fifth wheel. When that lever is all the way in, the trailer is securely attached. When that release lever is pulled out, the kingpin is released. So make sure that the release lever is all the way in a secured position. Now, some of these fifth wheels are sliding, adjustable in terms of their position here. This one is not. We do have one of our test trucks does have a sliding fifth wheel. So if you were using that truck for your test, tell the examiner that you check to make sure the pins securing the fifth wheel are secure. So if the fifth wheel is secure, and then you would check to make sure you got enough clearance back here between the back of the tractor and the landing gear if you had an adjustable sliding fifth wheel. Now, continuing our connection component check, we need to check the air lines as they attach to the trailer. These are the glad hands. These are the connection devices. Now, you do not need to remove them and reattach them, but tell the examiner you're checking these connection components. Make sure these glad hands are securely attached. Make sure there's no air leaks with these seals. Check the electrical line. Make sure that it is latched securely. There's a little latch there that holds the tongue and groove in. Make sure that the electrical line is securely attached. Check the condition of the air hoses and electrical line again, checking for frays, splices, not allowed. Make sure there's no cuts or cracks. Make sure the air lines are not leaking, and make sure that these components are not touching the deck of the tractor. You also need to check what's called the apron of the trailer. The apron of the trailer is the underside right here. This is a big metal plate that's welded on the underside of the trailer. You can see how it ends just back here. That apron is supporting the weight of the trailer. Make sure that this apron is not cracked or damaged and properly lubricated. The top of the fifth wheel itself, we refer to that as the skid plate. The apron is resting on top of the skid plate. The skid plate should be checked to make sure that it's not bent, cracked, damaged, and again also properly lubricated. We can't see the kingpin with the trailer attached, but the kingpin's coming down the center of the apron there. That's what it is classed by the jaws. The kingpin can be checked with the trailer detached, and you want to check your kingpin to make sure that it's not bent or damaged. Here's a quick look at what the kingpin looks like with the trailer detached. Again, not bent or cracked or damaged, and properly lubricated. You can see the apron here where the trailer is going to rest on the fifth wheel skid plate, and it is properly lubricated. After you've completed your outside inspection, before you do the in-cab inspection, this is when the lights need to be checked, and the examiner is going to help you with this process. So what the examiner wants you to do is get in the truck and operate the lights, tell the examiner which lights you're operating, and then he will check them from outside and give you a thumbs up that they're working. So I'm going to get in the truck. I'm going to start the truck up and put the headlights on. So then what I would do is ask the examiner, my left and right low beams operating? He gives me a thumbs up. My left and right running lights operating? My 5 clearance lights up on top, are they lit and operating? All right, then left signal, sir. Right signal. 4-way flashers. Okay. High beams. Very good. Okay, now would you go to the back of the tractor for me, please? I'd like to check the rear lights. All right, are my tail lights operating left and right? My brake lights working? My left signal? My right signal? My 4-way flashers? Are the clearance lights operating on the top of the trailer? Thank you. All right, let's go back to the rear of the trailer, please. All right, are my tail lights operating left and right? My left signal? My right signal? My 4-way flashers? And my brake lights? License plate light? Running lights? And clearance lights? Oh, very good. Okay, now if you could come back, sir. Only other thing I need to check are my backup lights. Backup lights working? Thank you. So that's how you complete the light check with the help of the examiner, but you have to tell the examiner which lights you want him to check. What you're proving then is that you know which lights need to be checked. Now he's going to get in the truck with you and we'll do the in-cab inspection. First thing I want to do in the in-cab here is I want to show the examiner my fire extinguisher down here. It is securely attached. It is charged in the green. It's the proper size and type. I want to check my fuses. We have the spare fuses here in this truck. They're required by rule. And then the reflective triangles are underneath the back seat back there. They're required by rule. Now I'm going to put the safety belt on and I'm going to check the safety belt. I want to make sure that the safety belt is not frayed, that it's not cut or damaged in any way. I want to make sure that it latches securely here into the latch, and then make sure that the mounting points at the top and the bottom are secure. Next, I'm going to do a safe start. I have a manual transmission here. I want to make sure it's in neutral. I want to make sure the brakes are set. Push the clutch in, and then foot on the brake and start the truck. Next, I'm going to check my lighting indicators. So I want to put on the left signal, show the examiner that works, check the right signal, make sure that works. Put the 4-way flashers on. I should get the 2 indicators left and right. I want to put my headlights on so I can operate my high beam. When I put my high beam, I get the little blue light there. Okay. The ABS light on this truck is off. It comes on with the ignition, and then once the truck started, the ABS light goes off, indicating to me that there's no problems with the ABS. And then I want to go over the gauges. I've got the water gauge right over here. It's not up to temperature yet, but it'll get up in the 180, 190 range. The important thing with the water temperature is that we do not overheat and if it was overheated, it would be we'd have a little red light. Same thing with the oil pressure here. If the oil pressure were too low, we'd have a little red light. So as you can see, the oil pressure is just fine. Tachometer here. Here's our speedometer that we need for the test. Then over here we have the voltmeter gauge. The voltmeter gauge tells us how much electricity the generator or alternator is producing. That has to be above 12, and as you can see, it's a little over 14, so that's good. Then air pressure, we have two gauges here because there are two tanks. The air pressure is a little over 120 pounds. Our operating range between 100 and 125. And we'll talk about checking for air leaks here in a minute. Here are my heater air conditioning defroster controls. Now the examiner does want me to turn the fan on, turn the defrost on, and prove that I've got defrost being blown up on the windshield. I also want to check the heater, so I'll turn the heat on even though it's summer, and check down here at the floor to make sure I'm getting adequate heat into the vehicle. I should check my windshield, make sure my windshield's not cracked, chipped, damaged, no illegal stickers in it. I should check my mirrors. Checking the mirrors, again, make sure they're not damaged, cracked, missing, properly adjusted, and clean. Along with the windshield, I should check the windshield wipers, put them on, prove that they operate, push in on the washer, and show the examiner that the washer fluid is in fact being squirted up on the windshield to clean your windshield off. Check my horn should work. Almost all of our trucks are going to have a horn electric operated on the steering wheel. Some are air horns, but all you got to do is check the one horn. Now what I want to do is I want to demonstrate to the examiner that my parking brakes are working. So being a manual transmission, I'm going to put the clutch in. I'm going to put it in first gear, make a very gentle and weak attempt to pull forward with the brakes on. That proves that the brake is working. It is. Now I'm going to isolate these. I think what I'll do first is I'll release the trailer brake, leaving the tractor brake on, make another weak attempt at pulling forward. That proves that the tractor brake is in fact holding. Then I'm going to reverse that. I'm going to pull the trailer brake out, push in to release the tractor brake, and I'm going to pull forward and check that the trailer brakes are working, and they are holding the truck. That also allows me to check the connection to make sure the jaws are locked securely on the kingpin. So this enables me to do two checks at the same time, brakes and secure connection. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull forward and stop the truck with the service brake, which is my foot brake, to make sure that the brake is operating properly. I'm going to check my mirrors, make sure it's safe to pull forward. Just go forward a little bit and then just stop with the foot on the brake pedal and tell the examiner that the truck in fact stopped straight, didn't pull to left or right. Put it in neutral. Now I'm going to keep my foot on the brake and go into the air brake check. Now this is important that you remember how to do this. Leave the parking brakes released. Leave your foot on the brake, turn the key off to kill the motor. Then turn the key back to the on position so that all of the lights and buzzers and all the electronics work. And then sit here for 1 minute watching your air gauges, checking for any air leaks. You're not allowed to lose more than 4 pounds of pressure in 1 minute with a Class A combination vehicle. If you're using a straight truck, it would be 3 pounds in a minute. The amount of pressure I have in the brake pedal is equivalent and the same as what it took me to stop, no more, no less. And what I do to count my minute is I take my left hand and I do this. That's 10. That's 20, and you do that for the full 60 seconds. Now the examiner's timing you, not timing for you, but timing you to make sure you're doing it for the full 60 seconds. After you've done that, tell the examiner, yep, air pressure held, we did not lose more than the 4 pounds of pressure in 1 minute. Next, we want to check the low air warning signal. So with the key on, so that the signal will work, I'm going to pump the brake pedal until I get lights and or buzzer to indicate low air pressure. And there they come on just above 60 pounds in this truck, which is correct. They have to come on between 60 and 80. So the low air warning signal is working properly. Now what I want to do is I want to check to make sure that the emergency brakes come on when I lose air pressure. So it's real important you keep your eyes on these two buttons. When you're doing this, don't look at the gauges, look at the buttons. What we want is we want both of these buttons to pop out. They both must pop out. So pump away on the brake pedal, watching the buttons. I want them both to pop out here. There's one, and there's the second one. Get that second button to pop out. This is important. Now it has to pop out between 20 and 40 pounds, and as you can see, we're at about 25 pounds when we did this, so we're perfect in terms of pressure for checking to make sure the emergency brakes are working properly. All right? Then ideally we should start the truck up, put the truck in gear, make sure that the truck does not move, that these emergency brakes are holding. That completes your in-cab inspection. Now what we're going to do is we're going to rev the engine up to build our air pressure back up to 125 pounds before we take off. All right? That completes your inspection. If you have any questions, check with your instructors. Practice this air brake check with our trucks at the school. It's real important that you do this properly. If you mess up any one of these three things of the air brake check, you'll fail your test. We don't want that to happen. So now that you've had a good look at the inspection process, I just want to take a couple minutes and show you where you'll be doing your backing maneuvers here in Hudson for your test in Wisconsin. The truck is going to be parked right here where we had it for the inspection process, and this is where the straight back is done. What you're going to do is you're going to pull forward so that the rear of the vehicle is just past these tall cones on this side. Then you have to back up straight. Now that distance, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cones back, that's 100 feet. And what you're going to do is you're going to back up and stay within those cones, that full 100 feet, until the front of the truck is past the furthest cone. When you get there, you stop, set your brakes, honk your horn. That lets the examiner know that you've done with that maneuver. Then what you're going to do is you're going to pull forward to do the offset. So what you're going to do is you're going to pull forward through that lane you were just in, all the way up to where these 3 cones are. That's where you start the offset with a Class A vehicle. With a Class B, you'll be 40 feet shorter of that. So what you'll do is, starting in this right-hand lane with the truck and trailer straight, or the truck straight being Class B, then you are going to back up, ending up in what they call the offset lane. So you're going to end up over here on this side, which would be then the oncoming lane of traffic. And you are to back up until your front bumper gets just this side of these taller cones. So you're backing up, keeping the vehicle in this lane, and stopping right here with the front bumper. Now with the straight back maneuver over here, you're allowed 1 pull-up. With this maneuver, with this offset maneuver, you're allowed 2 pull-ups here without any deductions of points. So don't hesitate to do a pull-up, especially that first one. And if you do a pull-up, you're backing up, trying to get into this space, but the truck may not be very well centered. When you pull forward over into this lane and straighten out in it. Again, not going any further than where those 3 cones are. So if the initial attempt to back into this lane, you get cattywampus and can't get it in there straight, do the pull-up, but intentionally pull over into this lane, straighten yourself out, and then essentially it's a straight back into this lane. All right? So that's the second of the 3 maneuvers that you're going to do. The third maneuver then is going to be the alley dock. When you pull forward with the alley dock, you can go past those 3 cones up ahead. You can set yourself up anywhere you want on the asphalt here. What I'm suggesting is that you get right in the middle of this piece of asphalt and go a good 10, 12, 20 feet past where those cones are. They will be removed for that. And then you'll be backing into this alley dock area here. Now, you get 2 pull-ups with this maneuver also. And when you're doing this, you cannot go any further than the cone that's up ahead here. So when you do a pull-up, you have to stop before going past that cone. Then continue your backing, and the objective here, this is a 40-foot deep docking area. It's 12 feet wide. At the very back of it, there are some cones that are 3 feet apart. You have to get the rear of the vehicle in between these two cones back here. If you do not get the vehicle between these two cones, you will fail the test. You're allowed to get out and look twice to make certain that your vehicle, that the rear of the vehicle, rear of the trailer for Class A, or rear of the truck for Class B, is between these two cones. So don't get out if you're way out yonder, because you've got to save those looks, because you only get 2 of them. They will not let you get out a third time. And you have to get the back of the vehicle in this box that's 3 feet deep, all right? You can be off-centered, you can be a little crooked, that doesn't matter, but the rear of the trailer has to go here. As long as you are able to accomplish that, you're going to be able to pass the test. Again, you get 2 free pull-ups with the AliDock. If you need to pull up more than the freebies, go ahead and do that. You simply lose a point or 2 by doing a pull-up. And it's really not going to be a problem if you need an extra pull-up or 2 or 3 even, okay? But get the back of the truck or trailer in here, and then you'll be done with the backing maneuvers, and then you can go off and do the next phase of the test, which is the driving out on the public roads. So your instructors are going to teach you how to drive properly out on those roads. You're going to practice your backing, of course, and obviously the first thing you have to do is pass that pre-trip inspection. So you've got a lot of information here. We wish you well. The key here is practice, practice, practice. I'm Bill Collins, Apex Truck School, Hudson, Wisconsin. Have a good day. More important, have a safe day.